Hello and welcome to Ensure Your Resilience, Upleveling Financial Services Defenses. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and Amazon Web Services and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this fireside chat style conversation. Now, before we get to today's great session, we have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of it. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. Browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you're going to find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a few links from Rubrik. There's one to learn more, there's a link to the informative Rubrik Zero Labs report, and there's an opportunity to book a one-on-one follow-up meeting with Rubrik. So I encourage you to check all those out now and during the session, and feel free to share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fireside chat. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. We have John Murphy, Global Field Chief Security Officer and CISO for Rubrik. And we've got Clark Rogers, Director of Enterprise Strategy for Amazon Web Services. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. John, great to have you here. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we're looking forward to a great conversation today with Clark and I. Clark, I'd like to start us off, and I know this is an overly broad question, but I think it's probably good level set for everybody as we start to talk about this. Can you tell us what security means really for AWS?
Sure thing, and thanks for having me today, John. I appreciate it. Um, it is a broad question, but at AWS, we tend to talk about it across three distinct tiers, right? So, first, security is our top priority, which is, of course, very easy to say, but very difficult to do at scale, especially at cloud scale. So we invest a lot in our global infrastructure so we can be close to our customers and meet their data residency needs if they need to have it, and of course offer that global resiliency that they need. On top of that, we build secure services that our customers can use to help run their business and secure their business. And both of those elements, follow the secure by design principles, excuse me, that we've been using since we started in 2006, right? So that's phase one. The second piece is organizational design and mechanisms, right? So at AWS, we're slightly different, where all of our business leaders who may own one or more services, while they're responsible for the P&L, they're also responsible for the security of their services, right? So when you have that as a motivation, security and your profit line being your top priority, it makes it very, very serious for everyone. And then lastly, and I would argue that this is the most important part of the AWS security brand, is our security culture. Again, security is everyone's job. It starts at the top. The CEO sets the tone that security is the most important thing for us. And then that really helps align everybody else's motivations, the metrics we gather, and everything we follow to provide the most secure platform we possibly can for our customers.
That makes total sense, and I think it ties nicely to. I'll sort of answer that question for Rubrik in the same kind of way. I think that the key differentiator for Rubrik is that we started as a data backup company, right? We started with the idea that we were going to simplify data backup 10 years ago. And so our founders really made some very core decisions from their experiences at the likes of Google and Oracle and a number of other startups in terms of how they think about data and how they think about security. So when you think about what Rubrik does, essentially we start with the idea that data is the foundational and the most important element that any organization has. And I think as we sort of think about that throughout the data lifecycle, we add a whole lot of value just in terms of being able to help organizations to manage what that data really is. That starts with awareness. It starts really with an understanding of what exactly do I have under management and what do I actually need to do with it. But it goes beyond that. It starts to give you really some deep business insights into what are the risks associated with that data and what potentially is happening inside my organization that potentially is not something that was planned, that we see from, let's say, a third party or from even someone who's penetrated our networks and necessarily gotten access to the data. So what we're constantly thinking about from that perspective is how do we protect that data throughout the entire life cycle, and how do we give our customers a very good, clean understanding, not only from what do I have, but what's the risk associated with it. And I think that's sort of where we kind of transgress from core data backup at the very start of this conversation to now we're talking about business enablement and understanding how we tie back to what are the critical business services we deliver and how is data supporting that or not supporting that potentially. So great way to start this conversation. I think there's kind of an implicit assumption that we make that everything around us potentially may fall down through lack of planning or through just the fact that that we have a lot of the large ecosystem of folks who are looking to control and access data for us have lots of capabilities. So what we try to do is to make sure that at any point in time, should everything else fall down, you've still got access to your data and you still clearly understand how that is going to add business value and how you're going to be able to recover in the event that you need to.
And with all the cyber threats that are out there, being able to recover from known good data is more important now than probably ever.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I think the problem for those of us in the industry for a long time is has always been we spend a great deal of time building these architectures and looking at how do we make sure that we're always prepared. And I think that's critical. But I think the other side of that is there's a there's almost like a an uncomfortable feeling that says, well, if I let go of all that planning, what if it doesn't work? And am I comfortable in that moment just saying, okay, now what do I do? As opposed to saying, well, how did that not work? I think the most important thing from a continuity perspective is always thinking about what's that next thing that we have to do to make sure that
Yeah,
our customers, our services, that they all stay up and running and available to the people who depend on them.
for sure.
Yeah, great stuff. So, excuse me. So, Clark, as we think about that from a tech stack perspective, and I asked you that very overly broad question, kind of to start us out for a reason. We think about IaaS and we think about cloud services, IaaS, SaaS, PaaS services. And we've come a long way in the last couple of years. I remember thinking about this when I was working for financial institutions, and there was a whole lot of trepidation about losing control of the data center and losing control of all of those things that we managed for ourselves. And I think that very much was a control conversation. But I think the industry primarily has moved on. And I think now we're starting to think about, well, what's beyond the tech stack? How do we start to think about Amazon as a partner in all of this? And how do we leverage the benefits that Amazon brings to the table? I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Certainly, and to your point, the conversations I have, are primarily with the C-suite and board of directors around this topic, and rarely do they talk anymore about is the cloud secure or is the cloud secure enough for my data. In fact, I don't remember a conversation probably in the last 5 years about that. So people get it that we are. A place for serious people to do serious things in the cloud, right? And we have the controls in there that customers can use or the services use to meet their control requirements. So the tech doesn't really come up that much anymore. What does come up is how do I leverage my security capabilities to achieve the business outcomes that I'm looking for? right? And that's quite a nuanced question because, for those of us who've been doing this long enough, we remember when the security person, or maybe half a person, they kept in the basement for quite a long time until something bad happens, and they brought them out and they said, "Okay, fix this, and then go back, and we'll call you when we need you again." Now we have CISOs who are business leaders first, who happen to have the security expertise at the table with the rest of the C suite, regularly engaging with the boards, talking about business risk, all these great things. So, one of the things that comes up more often than not is, hey, my security team is size X. I need more security people, or I need more of a security focus. How do I grow my security team? Because I have yet to meet a customer that says I have enough security people, right? It just doesn't happen. So, one mechanism that we use at AWS and many other customers have used as well, or a similar program, is what we call the Security Guardians program. So, the Security Guardians program effectively puts a security minded individual into every development team across AWS, right? You typically identify them by, there's somebody on your development team who's a little bit more interested in security than everyone else is. So you incorporate this into that team. So it's a natural flow. AWS Security runs the program, right? So we make sure that the appropriate training is available, that there's an inside track back to AWS Security if there are questions. But what this does is it puts security and security capabilities front and center in every development team. And when I talk about development teams, it's not just people who are building software and services for our consumers to take advantage of, but all the tooling that we build internally. It's done the same way, right? So we have that security representative. AWS security gets eyes and ears into everything that's going on. But then more importantly, the right security is built at the right time and the right step of the development process, so that there's not a conflict when it comes time to move things to production on a Friday night. Things are secure by design. They're executed at that point, and security is not a conflict. Do we release this feature or do we put in the security fix? The security fix is there, and if you do run into that conflict, it's a business imperative, it's the cultural imperative that the security fix goes in before the feature. The Security Guardians program itself has been very successful internally. We've talked about it several times on different webinars and a couple of YouTube videos that are out there. But what's really great is when we see our customers implement something very similar. So we hear names like security ambassadors, security champions, but it's the same idea. And it's really the top way to scale your security team's influence and impact without having to hire those security bodies.
Great. Thank you, Clark, very much. That's helps tremendously in terms of understanding how that really adds value as customers start to think about where their responsibility has traditionally been, and where they're now free to start to think about, how do I make more use of the resources that I have available to me. That's fantastic. One of the things that you mentioned there right at the start of the conversation that I would love to dig in on is, this whole conversation about whether or not we're really talking about bits and bytes anymore. And who is the audience that we really want to be able to help understand what we as organizations do to help to secure infrastructure, to help to secure applications, and that full stack. But talking about it in a way that makes much more sense to people who maybe aren't technical by nature. I wonder if you could kind of take us through who you typically see in your travels and what resonates with them most.
Certainly. Well, customers have to make wise investment decisions on how they protect their estate and where they're making investments, to achieve their business goals, right? So there's only a small pool of money that everybody's asking for. So again, very happy that for our highest performing customers, our CISOs have a seat at that table. They're reporting to the board regularly, and they've developed those relationships. The key thing that I've been seeing as of late is when CISOs first started reporting to the board, they would report status, right? We
Mm.
have X vulnerabilities, or we've patched 30 machines, or whatever the case may be, and may have 10 or 15 slides of this. While helpful, that's not the language that boards speak. Boards speak in the terms of risk, dollars and cents, revenue, opportunity, all these kinds of things. So, as we've seen the CISO board presentations evolve, the metrics are still there, but they tend to be in appendices, right? So now these conversations are really business conversations. So a risk conversation might go something like business unit A that has our most high profit application that you all are aware of and our customers love is behind on its security maintenance, for example. If something were to happen at this point, we are running the risk of losing X million dollars in revenue, right? That rings true to a board, and that allows the board to understand, okay, we need to make sure that resources are dedicated to make sure that this particular business unit meets the bar that needs to happen, so we can continue to enjoy profits, our stock price, et cetera. Similar approaches can be used. We used the last example, we were talking about the Security Guardians program. That's not a free program, right? We invest money in that, and as our customers do as well. So when you're speaking to the board about something like that, yes, we're going to build security into every product. A board may be like, okay, that may or may not be a good thing, but what other value comes out of that? Well, the value is if we build security into the product early and we don't have that security rework at the end, the cost of a release starts to come down, right? And if the cost of the release starts to come down, that rework time goes away. Now you're able to put more cycles into feature releases, which now begs the question, can I get more features out the door more quickly and bring in more revenue? Right. So it's a completely different conversation than just, I need to build gates and locks and keep all the bad people out. I'm actually adding value. I'm increasing velocity for the business that we're all here to support. And that's the kind of conversation that boards love to have.
No, it's fantastic insight, and I think it's insight as well as I think you pegged it right up front. It's putting it in context that everybody can understand. I think um, having having been a technologist my entire career, I think it's very easy for me to think in terms of systems and interfaces and speeds and feeds and all the technical things that go into making it. But I think we can never forget that at the end of the day, our mission, whether we're a public company or a private company or a federal organization, is about delivering goods, value, services to people through the things that we do as an organization. And that is not necessarily technology, that is about providing the things that people count on. So thank you for taking us through that. I think that's fantastic. I think
You're most welcome.
yes, yeah, I think the thing that we lose sight of sometimes is how does the technology tie back to what it is that we want to deliver, and then how do we put that in the context of there are costs associated with doing business, and there are things associated with that that we have to just constantly be aware of and tracking, and always asking ourselves, is this the best use of our time, our money, our investments, etc.
Well, security is a balance of risk, right? So we can make the most secure organization on the planet, but if you can't make business decisions and move forth and make money, um, shutting off all the computers to keep all the bad people away, that doesn't help, right? So everything is a level of risk, and you have to determine where you make your investments appropriately. Hopefully, you're making security investments that lead to strong business outcomes at the same time.
Yeah, completely agree. The most secure system is one that's not networked. It's in a room that nobody can ever get into, and you can't possibly do anything with it. But you can't also make any money off of that. Right?
That's right.
Yeah, good stuff. I think one of the things that I wanted to mention as well is we often get into this question of, are there specific industries, are there specific areas where cyber is something that captures our attention more so than others? And every industry is important. There's no doubt about it. I think when we think of financial services and this whole adaptation of cloud, I can certainly speak to my firsthand experience, which was that we certainly understood the value and the potential for freeing up massive amounts of resources to do much more value added work as we went through it, and did a migration to cloud. But one of the questions that we were most concerned about was, what is that? What are the things that are unique to financial systems that are security focused, but are also things that we had to overcome. And I'd love to spend just a couple of minutes bouncing those off of you and get your thoughts as we go through it, if you don't mind.
Please, and I think the financial services customer, the healthcare and life sciences customer, they're facing a lot of the same challenges.
Oh, but yeah, very much so. I think healthcare and financial services are
Yeah,
two of the industries that have suffered quite a bit at the hands of cybercrime these days. So I guess the first thing I typically start with when I think about this is, why is it a concern for financials? Why are financials attractive to criminals, cyber criminals? And that the short answer is the Willie Sutton answer. It's where the money is, right? That's where everything is concentrated. From the perspective of all the banks typically do business through a controlled set of interfaces and through markets. And all those things come together on a daily basis and they are predictable. So if you are someone who is looking to figure out how do you game that system for personal advantage, well, there's an easy way to do this, which is just understand how everything comes together. I think the second piece of that is contagion. And the contagion aspect of it is certainly because we as let's say large financials rely on other large financials to constantly do business with, whether we're talking about cash payments or settlements or start of day or end of day or market closes. All of the things have to come together with, is everybody in the same place in terms of being able to commit to trading and to actually transact in the global market system. And a lot of that just does rely on us signaling each other and sharing information between us. And that then creates, from a risk management perspective, to your point, a potential for a single event to have a very large scale impact across multiple industries and multiple companies. I think the third thing I would add is just the idea of the amount of cybercrime that we're seeing. So I saw a stat the other day that I was kind of surprised at, but honestly, when you think about it, it does make sense. If you look at cybercrime in economic terms, it is now the number three economy in the world behind that of the US and China, meaning that cybercrime is on track to now be able to be compared to the economies of those two in terms of
hmm
what's consumed and what's produced by it on a yearly basis. And I think the part of that is certainly because there is so much that is dependent upon global commerce. And I think the other part of it is there's so much dependent upon data. And the more data that we consume, the more data that we take in, whether we're doing it knowingly or whether we're doing it just because of the fact that we are transacting with others, we end up with a huge, huge concentration risk because we've got all this data under management now, and we don't necessarily have the insights to necessarily manage it effectively or to manage it with minimal risk in mind. I was wondering I just talked about a whole bunch of different things, but would love to hear your thoughts on those.
Yeah. So yes, to all the things you said. The one thing I'll pull out of there that has been a challenge for customers broadly, as long as I've been in IT and security, is that data management that you talk about, right? And um, in a world of AI where everybody is interested in developing the next Gen AI application or using Gen AI for their business solutions, what data do I have? Where is it? What is the sensitivity of it? Are key questions that customers have been asking for years, and many who have dedicated the resources to do it are in a very good place now from a business agility perspective, that they know where their data is, they know how it's classified, they know how it's backed up, they know how to all those elements allows them to move faster and experiment with some of the new technologies that are available to them today.
Yes, yeah, absolutely true. And I think there's always been this thing in technology where we say, well, let's look at what it is that we're doing with data and let's understand it. And these go back to IBM initiatives in the 90s. And I'm dating myself here clearly, but I think the challenge always was that we were thinking about it from the perspective of how do we think about how to store data and how do we think about how to understand how we're using data as opposed to understanding what the data really is. And I think we've made that change in certainly the last 10 years, if not longer, to now be able to look at it and say, those things are important, but not as important as putting that data into context, kind of as we started at the
Correct.
top of the call, to say, what does that mean to my business? And is it important to my business or is it not important to my business? Because then that brings us back to the risk management question to say, well, should I be keeping track of that? Should I be paying for it? Should I be doing all the things that I'm doing with it? And does it represent a risk to my business at some point?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
regulators are demanding it as well, right? So that helps keep businesses on track. That in fact their data is as important as they think it is. Oh, and by the way, there may be an audit coming around it.
yes. Yeah, exactly right. I think you took us exactly where I was hoping to go, which is that I think auditors, regulators are looking at that from a risk perspective and saying, are we doing enough to be transparent about those things to people who care about them? So
Yeah.
publicly traded, privately held, doesn't really matter, but it's looking at those things from the perspective of, are they really a cost of doing business, or are they a business risk that we need to manage more effectively and more transparently?
And I would actually throw one other thing in there. Is it a business advantage to us?
Yeah.
Right? If we are managing our data properly, if we have multiple third party attestations that say we are doing security right, according to the standard, that sets us apart from our competitors, right?
It does.
In the cloud provider world, it certainly does. Not all clouds are built the same, right? AWS looks at things very differently than some of the other cloud providers out there.
Yes. And understanding that, I think, is really important for the decision makers who are then going to leverage those clouds for all the goodness that comes from a business perspective. Great points. Clark, you talk to customers all the time and at all different levels of the organization. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about, and you mentioned AI, but what are some of the things that you're hearing most in terms of what customers are thinking about and where they see the future, the next 2 years, 3 years most?
Well, hopefully the guests on this webinar are not sick of the term generative AI, but that answers your question, right? From the boardroom to the 9 a.m. stand-ups, Gen AI is everywhere across virtually every customer and industry that I interact with, right? And it's not too dissimilar to the cloud conversation from 10 or 11, excuse me, the cloud conversation from 10 or 11 years ago. Um, is Gen AI secure? How do I use it? What's the best way to implement it for my business? And we talked earlier about the CISO being a business leader, right? Versus the Department of No and being a pure technical security person. So we learned during cloud adoption the CISOs that said, nope, I'm not supporting your business initiative and you're not going to the cloud without my approval, found out very quickly that people went to the cloud anyway. And then the CISOs had a lot of work to do to secure it, make it compliant, and all the other kind of things that they had to do, versus the CISOs who embraced the cloud and said, hey, let's go on this journey together. Hey, there's a few things I need to do to help you make this less risky. And the businesses that, they work together with their security teams had a much more positive outcome. And those are the ones who are able to take advantage of things like Gen AI today. So fast forward to now, a lot of those similar conversations. You have some CISOs who are saying, you know, I'm not even going to use the term Gen AI inside of my business because it's entirely too risky. While the business leader is saying, no, I need to take advantage of this quickly. So, as you well know, there's lots of Gen AI tools and services that are out there. Some of them are free, some of them are paid for. What customers have really liked to lean in on AWS specifically is our Amazon Bedrock offering, right? Which allows customers to consume multiple AI models, but using the same security controls that they've been comfortable with for years for using AWS. I mentioned earlier that AWS is for serious people doing serious things. So when we talk about our financial services customers, our healthcare and life science customers, they're using Bedrock the AWS way, the secure way to interact with those LLMs, excuse me, and they know that where their data is, they know that the data is not training the model, and it's protected with all the tools that they've used with AWS. We've also released Amazon Bedrock guardrails, which allow additional controls to make sure that AI is used in to the level that the customer is comfortable with. Um, and this is all driven by this quote unquote unknown, right? Today, as of this recording, there are not many, if any, uh, AI regulations globally. I know they're being discussed. I think there's like 600 and some odd in flight, but with the absence of formal regulation on AI, which I believe if we have this conversation next year, there'll probably be something or a little bit something more concrete. It's let's apply best practices, right? We know security best practices. The core of them have not changed significantly in the last 30 years, right? Identity, logging, perimeter protections, all these kinds of things. It's doing the basics well, or some of my colleagues have said, make sure you're eating your security vegetables on a regular basis. So let's apply those core principles to AI. After all, it's software at the end of the day. We know how to secure software, right? So let's apply those principles to AI. Let's use tools like Amazon Bedrock to add that extra layer of security that we expect from AWS and using the tools that we're comfortable with. And let's move forward and experiment with this exciting new technology. Additionally, so that's the customer use of AI for whatever business outcomes that they're looking for. My security focused customers are also looking at things like, well, how can I use AI to help my security team do more with less? We talked about the Security Guardians program earlier. That's a human. What about using AI to help with security? So again, lots of publicly available tools. I'll speak specifically to what AWS has to offer. Um, First, we've been doing AI and ML for 20 some odd years or so, so it's not new to us. But we're now making sure that the generative AI applications are front and center, and the capabilities are front and center in our existing services. So last year we announced some generative AI capabilities for Amazon Detective, which allows um, SOC analysts, right, to triage alerts much quicker so then the humans can focus on the real problems as opposed to really having to go through a whole lot of things. Amazon Inspector has some Gen AI capabilities as well. And then Q for developer, right? It's a new service. It used to be called Code Whisperer, but the idea is you can put in you can have as a coding companion to your developer to make sure that they're coding things securely in their environment. Again, this is helping support like something like the Security Guardians initiative, where not only should you be doing the right things, but here's a tool to help you do the right thing, right? So we're really really excited that more and more services are going to have generative AI capabilities in them, specifically the security services that can then, again, scale that security team's effectiveness across the business, ours and our customers.
Yep, absolutely. You just covered a lot of great material there. I think the thing that I would add from the rubric perspective, as we think about that as well, is generative AI and where that leads us, because it's certainly the path from here to whatever the future holds is not linear. We don't know exactly what those models will become or
Sure.
what we will be doing with those models in 18 months, 12 months. I think that's exciting to me. I think there's a lot of potential room there for us to really transform the way we think about data. As we move forward with rubric, one of the things that we constantly think about is, I mentioned earlier that there's a huge amount of data that's generated both willingly as well as kind of as an artifact of other things that we're doing.
Hmm.
We have incorporated AI into our models as well to help companies understand what it is that they actually have, and both the negative side of that, what is the data risk that potentially is there, but also the positive side of that, what exactly do I have, and am I thinking about that data in the right way? Is there a new source of business insight or intelligence that we typically haven't configured or thought about before, in terms of things that I could do to help my customers to leverage
Right.
what we do for greater value at less cost? These are the kinds of things that we are constantly looking for in terms of insights into the data that we can actually perceive as we process that and understand what it is and secure it more than anything else. So I think it's a very exciting time for us as we think about all the different sources of data. As I mentioned, third party there, and third party I think is a big source, but even the data that we generate as an outcome of doing business on a daily basis. A lot of that is gathered in informal sources. It may be on NAS drives, it may be in different places in your organization. But the fact that we have the ability between us to not only safeguard that and give you the ability to manage it effectively, but also to give you the data insights that go with managing it and making it a business asset value, I think are tremendous opportunities for companies to start to think about as they continue to go down this path.
100%. Many customers don't know the gold that they have in their file stores, right?
I think that's,
And
yeah,
generative AI tools, whether they're from Rubrik or others, helps them discover what that is, and maybe it's a new business, right? Or maybe it's a new
yes,
business opportunity for them. It's very, very exciting.
absolutely. Absolutely. Clark, I want to thank you so much. I know we're up on time, but this has been a fantastic conversation. And I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to talk to us about this and look forward to continuing the conversation in the future session.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's an exciting time to be in technology, security, and business. I
Great.
appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Scott, back to you.
All right. Yeah, great conversation so far. We do have some audience questions. Let's get to a few of those here. Um, you guys made some great points about the boardroom conversations and how to talk about reducing costs by applying security early. And audience members picking up on that, they're acknowledging the use case that Clark you mentioned around saving money in development, by taking care of that security first and not having to come back and do it later. But they're wondering if there are some other effective arguments for the board around cost reduction with security for companies that maybe aren't shipping software products. Do you have any like other ways that people can save, by or see some cost reduction by focusing on security, other than software delivery?
Certainly, I'll take that first, and then maybe John can add on to that. So, a lot of this comes down to cost avoidance, right? So, if we look at um, if you're doing business on the internet, there is a risk of a cyber attack. Period. Right. So, investing in security programs such as incident response, for example, it's one of my favorite areas. Um, it may or may not be inexpensive investment to embark in, but customers that take the time to invest in the tools and the resources and the training for their incident response program, whether it's in cloud, on prem, whatever the case may be, and they tabletop that, and when they bring those security leaders and their business leaders to that incident response, the training, excuse me, it gives everybody the appropriate perspective of what could happen, right? So it can be very costly to get your CEO in an incident response tabletop exercise, or your board in an incident response tabletop exercise for half a day, but the rewards pay itself back. And then if you can find through those exercises any gaps that you have in your recovery process, or being able to stand up after an attack, or maybe you can withstand an attack, this is the time to test all that stuff out. Then you can make much more appropriate financial decisions and investments moving on down the line, knowing that you have a tested and proven incident response program. There's also some ancillary benefits around this. Reduce Potentially reducing your cyber insurance premiums if you don't self-insure, right? Where those cyber insurance companies are looking at you and say, "Oh, well, you run incident response every quarter, and here's the results of this, and this is how you're taking the outcomes of that incident response drill and rolling it back into your security program." They may reduce your premiums there as well. So there is a financial impact in there, whether you're shipping software or not.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah. I completely agree on all your points there. I would also add to that process of going through an incident response preparation. I think one of the things that I see as assume breach is sometimes looked at as, well, that's a doomsayer kind of viewpoint, and we shouldn't necessarily want to think about our organizations being breached. But one of the things that I like to think about is, if you do that, if you incorporate that into your plan and you simply say everything we do is critical and we will always do it, but in the event that it fails, I don't care why it failed in the moment. I simply want to do and focus on, what do I have to do to bring my business back up and deliver those critical services, whatever they are, to my customers. Because that then gives you the ability now to say, let's just focus on restoring business. We will figure everything else out later. But more importantly, let's go back to either mission critical services or revenue generating activities, or whatever it is that you do for your customers, because that makes it a whole lot easier not to have people focused somewhere else in terms of, well, what could this possibly mean in terms of our architecture, or in terms of what we're going to do 6 months from now or next year's budget. Yes, we all will consider those things, but we're not going to consider that right now. We're going to consider what we have to do to get back to where we want to be from a business outcome perspective. And I think, it certainly builds upon, Clark, all the great points you've made. But I think it's also something that organizations tend to kind of take into the moment when this is happening. And I think that sometimes distracts us from value adding activities we could be doing in that moment.
And if I may, that circles back perfectly to the security culture conversation we were having earlier. Uh, Anytime you can have a blameless security culture is a win, right? It doesn't matter who typed the wrong thing or who clicked on this email or whatever the case may be. We get things back up and running, and then we do a correction of errors process and go find out what happened, and we thank that person, quite frankly, for finding a hole in our defenses that we're then able to build mechanisms so that thing doesn't happen again.
Yes.
I think it's a key element, and investing in that culture and having that mindset. Technology is going to change. 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about something completely different. But if you've built that strong security culture, that strong security culture will allow you to pivot and be much more agile as these new technologies come on board. So the technology isn't really the big deal. It's investing in that security culture to react as you mentioned there.
So well said, Clark. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Great.
fantastic. All right. And thanks for that question. We've got another question here about what security and regulatory concerns are top of mind right now for the financial services customers that you guys are talking to.
John, you want to take that one first, and then I'll add on.
Sorry. So I didn't hear it.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll start that question over. Give me one sec. Okay. Yeah, so we've got a question here about what security and regulatory concerns are top of mind right now for the financial services customers that you guys are talking to.
Yeah, yeah. So certainly, I think first and foremost, what regulators are looking for is transparency. And I mean it in this way. When we look at what typically happens from an operational perspective, regardless of whether it's business operations or technology operations, there is a large bucket of things that are just sort of considered cost of doing business. And those are things that, perhaps we made a mistake in terms of manufacturing, we made a mistake in terms of fulfillment or shipping or something along those lines. Those things typically don't meet the level of a disclosure to a regulator, let's say. But what regulators are now looking at is when it comes to cybersecurity, which is a critical part of every organization now, there is not that level of transparency beyond it's a cost of doing business. And I think that's what they're driving. So driving towards. I'm old, so I would say this: in 2001, when we looked at what was the driver for a lot of change from a regulatory perspective, it was that boards didn't fully understand what was going on financially with their organizations. I think we saw that again in 2008, when boards could be less focused on the risk management side of the house than regulators would like them to be. I think this is sort of that next tranche of raising awareness from a risk perspective and making sure that boards do understand from a cyber perspective that what happens in that bucket of things called cost of doing business really needs to be pared down and made much more transparent to stakeholders. If you're not publicly traded, you still have a set of stakeholders who want to know about that. But certainly you don't have to get into the business of just looking at that as, well, that's just something that we have to live with. And I think that's really what they're going after.
Yeah, in my conversations with customers, it's a little bit more nuanced because yes, they have all the same regulatory questions that any other customer would have, but now that they've moved to the cloud and they moved on to AWS, their most common question centers around how do I demonstrate my control effectiveness in this cloud world to my regulator who may or may not understand cloud to the degree that they need to, right? So it's basically help me be a translator to my regulator. So, we do a couple things. We have a regulatory compliance team that actually engages with a lot of the regulators, and it gives them the training that they need so they understand how you do this in cloud is the same, or not how you do it is the same, but the control objective is the same as what you would do on prem. And here's what evidence would look like. But we've also developed a program called the Cloud Audit Academy, which helps our customer compliance and audit folks understand cloud as well. So then that enables them and scales them to have those conversations with their regulator and say, this evidence actually does meet what you're asking for.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're probably going to have to leave it there. But Clark, John, this has been a fantastic discussion. I know I've learned a lot. I think the audience has too. Thank you guys so much for your time and expertise today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap up, just a quick reminder about that link in the handout section where you can sign up for a one-on-one follow-up with Rubric. And now it's time for the Amazon gift card prize drawing. The winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Wendy Boots from Kentucky. So congratulations to Wendy Boots. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Rubric and Amazon Web Services for making this event possible. Thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.